A middle-aged man quietly stood behind the checkout counter. Wearing a dark blue uniform, he scanned barcodes just like any other new hire. Customers didn't look twice. Colleagues barely noticed. No one knew that the man handling those discount coupons was the founder of the entire retail chain. He wasn't there for training. He was there to investigate because whispers had reached him. Your store is selling defective goods to poor customers. And that morning, a single offhand comment from two customers standing behind him would unravel a truth capable of dismantling everything he'd built. You're about to enter a true story, where a CEO went undercover as a store clerk and exposed a sophisticated fraud network gnawing away at the very values he spent a lifetime upholding. Stay to the end, because the twist in this video might just change the way you lead or the silence you keep. Did you hear what that guy just said? The question made his hand freeze mid-scan. A whisper. Soft, but loud enough to shake the very foundations of what he thought were unshakable truths. It happened right there inside the retail store he had founded. The one he built from a humble booth in a shopping mall into a multi-state chain spanning 18 states. But right now, standing behind the register wearing that blue uniform like a regular employee, he wasn't a CEO, not a founder, not the boss. He was Steve, a new hire. James Landon, 48, was known in investment circles as a no-nonsense businessman. At age 29, he opened his first store using a personal loan from a college buddy. 2 decades later, Landon Supply Co. had become a major retail chain specializing in gear for working-class Americans, construction crews, truck drivers, maintenance techs, the people James once lived among as a homeless teen. He never forgot them, and he believed the company he built still served them with dignity and fairness. Until the anonymous messages started rolling in from someone claiming to be a former employee. Do you know your regional team is manipulating product pricing based on zip code? Loyal customers are being profiled just for how they dress. The mid-row branch refused to serve a man in a wheelchair. At first, James dismissed it as disgruntled noise. But then he called a former customer, someone who'd once worked as a construction site guard and had been the face of their Workers Deserve the Best campaign. The man replied, "I used to feel welcome. Now I'm not sure I belong there anymore." James couldn't sleep for days, not because of PR fear, but because he realized he might have become the kind of boss he used to loathe. The one behind glass walls reading glossy reports, while the front line was nothing but a blur outside the UV-tinted window. So, one early morning, he left his Seattle penthouse, drove 300 miles south, and arrived at the Mid-Row location, one of the first stores he ever built. Now also the one with the most internal complaints. No entourage, no regional manager, no heads up. Just a man in a ball cap, a backpack, and a slightly wrinkled employee shirt, wrinkled enough to feel authentic. The checkout line wasn't crowded. Staff was minimal. Customers trickled in. James got to work like any new employee would, learning the machine, flashing a polite smile, following the script. And then, he started to notice things that never show up in KPIs. The way employees avoided eye contact with customers, the bare minimum effort void of care, and most of all, the strange whispers shared between regulars. Late one afternoon, while scanning a pack of gloves, he heard it. "Did you hear what that guy said earlier? They're pushing defective stock into orders for poor folks. No one notices anyway." His heart stopped. A cold sweat crept down his back. Not because he knew it was true, but because it could be true. And if it was, then the brand he built, once a symbol of value and respect, was now a machine that squeezed profits from the very people he'd vowed to serve, out of gratitude, out of honor, and out of a promise he made to the kid he once was. The Landon Supply Store in Mid-Row sat on the edge of a worn-down industrial district. Its customers are mostly construction workers, truck drivers, technicians and mechanics from the surrounding factories. James had once said in an interview, "If there's anywhere I want to serve with everything I've got, it's places like this where real value comes from real hands." But what greeted him on his first day undercover? It was a truth that couldn't have been further from that dream. The morning shift began at 8:50 a.m. James, under the name Steve, arrived on time in his navy blue uniform name tag, clipped neatly, waiting by the staff entrance. Greg, the shift supervisor, showed up with a half-full cup of coffee-wrinkled shirt and red eyes from lack of sleep or lack of care. No one could tell. "Are you the new guy?" "Yes." "Sit and wait. I'll call you if it gets busy." No welcome aboard. No basic orientation. Just a cold indifference wrapped in routine. James's first post was a side register near the front entrance. He observed customers as they walked in. Most were laborers. Shirts stained with paint pant cuffs, dusted with cement-calloused hands. But what struck him more, this was how the staff reacted to each kind of customer. Wearing a construction uniform, no one approached. Drove a pickup, wore dark sunglasses, nice watch. Staff offered help immediately. Asking about discounts, labeled a difficult customer. With children or the disabled, not a priority. Greg even said it loud enough for the whole store to hear. You can tell who's here to buy and who's here to waste time just by their clothes. James clenched his fist. His chest tightened. This wasn't the culture he had built. At 11:15 a.m., he was assigned to scan a purchase for a middle-aged customer buying woodwork tools and metal pipes. The man asked to check the inventory at another store for extra quantities. Before James could pull it up, Greg barked from behind. "Don't bother. Other stores don't support that. But if we check, he might be able to." "Don't teach me my job. Just follow the system." The customer glanced at James, then muttered as he walked away. "Used to shop here twice a week. Now I see why I stopped." Mid-shift break. James entered the employee lounge, a cramped room lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Allie, a part-time cashier, was eating a cold sandwich, eyes glued to her phone. He tried to strike up a conversation. "Been here long?" "3 weeks, but I'll probably quit soon." "Why?" "Because here, customers are treated like burdens. And the staff, like tools. There's no space for people here." In the afternoon, foot traffic picked up. When James returned to the main counter, he saw something he'd never forget. A disabled man missing an arm was struggling to reach a toolbox on the high shelf. No employee helped. Greg was less than 10 feet away, saw him, and turned away. James rushed over, assisted him, and nodded politely. The man sighed. "Not everyone would do that. Last time I came, they told me to just shop online instead." At 4:45 p.m., Greg handed James the end-of-day checklist. At the bottom was a section marked Inventory for Transfer. James noticed 4 items tagged damaged. Relocate were still on shelves labeled clearance. He asked quietly, "Aren't we supposed to pull these?" Greg smirked. "Poor folks won't notice. As long as it's marked down, they'll buy it." That line hit James like a punch to the chest. Not because it was cruel, but because it was said so casually, like it was policy. On the drive home, James didn't turn on the radio. He drove in silence past the old neighborhoods where he used to hand out free gear when he first started. The shops, the signs, the lights were still there. Only one thing had changed. The word service had been twisted into performative standards, and serving the working class had become targeting the most exploitable. The next morning, James arrived at the store earlier than usual. He parked in the employee lot behind the building, and immediately noticed something odd. The night manager's car was already there. 6:45 a.m. Strange. But he brushed it off until a few hours later when he overheard a conversation that changed everything. 10:27 a.m. James was applying price labels to a new batch of tools. Next to the maintenance room, there was a narrow alcove with an old receipt printer and a wash sink. He heard two familiar voices murmuring nearby. "Did you check the batch number?" "Yeah." "Push the old stock to clearance. Just reprint the labels. Poor folks won't notice. Only the contractors buying bulk need careful handling. As long as it sells, it counts for KPIs, right?" "Exactly. Everyone gets a cut. No reports. No problems." James froze. He held his breath. The second voice was unmistakably Carlos, a long-time employee at the store. The other, he wasn't certain, but it sounded like Rick, the warehouse supervisor in charge of final inspections every week. James slowly backed up, pretending to grab a box and walk by. The two men didn't notice him. They stood beside a large cardboard crate. Inside were tools with old barcodes peeled off, replaced with fresh labels that looked perfectly legitimate. Later at lunch, James sat with Allie in the break room. Though she'd only been there 3 weeks, it was clear she'd already heard and seen more than most. He casually brought it up. "I noticed some of the clearance items look a little off." Allie looked up, lowered her voice. "You didn't hear? There's a whole phantom inventory thing going on." Carlos and Rick retag damaged goods, mark them as new stock, push them to clearance, but keep them on inventory records as untouched. And management doesn't know. Nobody asks. And if they do, nobody answers. James narrowed his eyes. The puzzle pieces were snapping into place. Greg told him, "Don't check stock for poor customers. Faulty products are conveniently on clearance shelves. And now, proof that insiders were profiting by exploiting the most vulnerable customers." That afternoon, James walked slowly through the clearance section. One item caught his eye. A Steel Pro wrench set an older model that had been recalled 5 months ago due to a weak central axle. It was sitting proudly on the shelf, labeled 100% new. But the SKU code didn't match any active product listing. He turned the box over. Faint letters on the back read, "Refurbished. Not for retail." A surge of anger rose in his chest. Not because someone was cheating, but because they were cheating the poor. The very people he built this company to serve. Back at his hotel, James opened his laptop. Using his temporary admin access from HQ, he dug into the internal product logs. He searched for the exact SKU of the wrench set. The system showed it had been decommissioned due to quality issues 2 months ago. A request filed directly by Rick. But last week's sales report showed 13 similar units had been sold at the Midrow location. That meant the product was reported as scrapped, but secretly relabeled and sold. For under-the-table profit, James sat still in the dark. One question rang in his head. How many customers have unknowingly bought defective goods from the very company I created to protect them? And the answer, it was coming soon. Because earlier that day, while exiting the store, James had overheard something else from Carlos and Rick. Tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Move the new batch. Done in 30 minutes. No one's gonna check. James left the store that afternoon with his mind spinning. The proof of fraud was undeniable. Inventory data had been manipulated. Defective goods were reboxed and sold to customers without the means to inspect them. At least 2 internal employees were involved. And worst of all, this wasn't new. It had been happening for months. That night, he rented a small room above a local cafe, far from the spotlight. Beside his laptop lay an old leather notebook, the kind he used back when he was just getting started before PowerPoint decks and quarterly reviews. On the first page, he wrote, "Systemic fraud. Mid-row. 3 levels involved." Then he started mapping it out. Level 1. Product manipulation. Rick, the warehouse lead. Carlos the middleman between inventory and sales. Their scheme: remove original product labels. Retag using codes from unrelated active batches. Place items in the discount bin. The profits weren't massive, but enough to justify a quiet kickback. Level 2. Operational complicity. Greg, the floor manager, wasn't directly involved, but his apathy told a story of its own, favoring VIP customers, ignoring the poorer ones. Silence traded for security. Level 3. Oversight paralysis. Regional managers hadn't flagged a thing for months, which meant one of two things. They were incompetent, or they had a reason not to see. What did James need? Undeniable evidence. One recording wouldn't cut it. He needed a trail, a full sequence of actions, dialogue, and most importantly, any exchange of money or material benefit. The next morning, James arrived early, slipping in through the back entrance to avoid Greg. He carried a pen camera synced to a private mobile app, a voice recorder hidden inside his lunchbox, a burner phone connected to a separate encrypted network. The day passed quietly. Rick cracked jokes as usual. Carlos stayed discreet. Greg was too busy juggling online orders to pay much attention. But James knew. This was the calm before the storm. 1:43 p.m. Allie sat across from him in the break room. Her eyes darted around. She knew something. They're moving inventory tonight, she whispered. Whenever that happens, the clearance section suddenly fills up the next morning with refurbished junk. James asked softly, "How long have you known?" "Since my first week. But I needed the job, and I couldn't stop them." Her answer didn't anger James. It only deepened his sense of responsibility. "Can you help me?" "Who are you?" "Someone is trying to fix what I built wrong." 0 p.m. The store closed. James volunteered to help with stockroom organization to stay late. He hid in the utility room, perfect view of the central warehouse, just beyond the main camera's reach. 9:43 p.m. Rick arrived. No uniform. A gray shoulder bag, the kind mid-tier managers used for off-the-books cash. Sector. 58 p.m. Carlos pulled in through the back gate. Engine off. Headlights dead. They greeted each other like clockwork. James hit record. "This batch has got some chipped paint. Still sellable. Poor folks won't notice. We giving Greg a cut." "Nah. Just route it through group code 42. Nobody checks those. 200 each. Quick job." Hands clap. An envelope changes hands. Then they moved box after box from the defect pile straight to tomorrow's display rack. James filmed it all. Every gesture. Every word. Every exchange. When it was over, he stayed behind in the dark. No sign of relief. No triumphant smile. Because he knew exposing an infection doesn't mean the disease is cured. The next morning, the mid-row store opened like any other day. A quiet trickle of customers moved in and out. Greg sat at the main desk, calm and confident like a captain sailing calm waters. Carlos manned the back room. Rick coordinated inventory. Everything appeared normal. None of them knew the storm had already been set in motion from headquarters. At 8:15 a.m., James sent a very specific email. Attached: video evidence, audio files, product code comparisons, and a brief anonymous statement from Allie. Recipient: Marla Trent, Senior Legal Officer at Landon Supply Group. Subject: internal fraud, urgent, mid-row location, CEO, direct oversight. Within 20 minutes, Marla replied, "Evidence is clear. Internal audit team and legal representatives en route." ETA. 11:00 a.m. At 10:55 a.m., two unmarked black SUVs pulled into the employee parking behind the store. 4 professionals in suits company badges visible stepped out accompanied by 2 uniformed security officers. Nicole, head of crisis communications, was also there. She approached James holding out a charcoal blazer and whispered, "You ready, Mr. CEO?" James didn't respond. He just nodded, his eyes cold and forged like steel after a night in the fire. He was no longer Steve. He was James Landon, founder, leader, and reckoner. At 11:13 a.m., the store's PA system chimed. Staff meeting in promo aisle. All team members report immediately. The order came straight from HQ. Employees gathered in the store's largest open space. Greg frowned. What the hell is this? Did anyone know about this? Carlos and Rick exchanged glances, worry beginning to show. At 11:17 a.m., the back door opened. James stepped in. In a clean-cut suit, he removed his cap, took off his glasses, and slipped his Steve name tag into his pocket. Silence. Total stillness. Greg stammered. Wait a second. That's... Carlos instinctively took half a step back. Rick's hands clenched, eyes scanning for escape. James stepped up onto the display platform and scanned the entire team. His voice, low and razor-sharp, cut through the stale air. I'm James Landon, and for the past 3 weeks, I've been a new hire in this very store. Not a single movement. I used to believe our system was sound. But I was wrong. I saw with my own eyes how some of you treated low-income customers like garbage, how defective products were relabeled, how KPIs were built on lies, and how some of you chose profit over purpose. He raised his hand. Marla stepped forward and handed him a folder. This is the proof. Video, audio, inventory data, product code logs. It's all here. Rick, Carlos, Greg, as of this moment, you are no longer employees of Landon Supply. A ripple of whispers spread. Allie gasped. Linda, the longtime cashier, covered her mouth in shock. Greg shouted, "You don't have the right to pull a stunt like this." James stared him down. "This isn't a stunt. I'm just doing what you wouldn't, stepping out from behind excuses and facing the truth." Carlos tried to edge toward the emergency exit, but the security team was already in place. Rick stood, frozen eyes down, not in arrogance, but in shame. James turned back to the staff. "I didn't come here for drama. I came to fix the trust we've lost. For those who remain, I don't expect perfection. I only ask for honesty." Nobody spoke. But their eyes said everything. Shock gave way to understanding. They realized this wasn't a boss here to intimidate. This was a man who dove headfirst into the dirt to clean a brand everyone thought was spotless. 3 days after the explosive terminations, the Midrow store was nearly unrecognizable. Greg, Rick, and Carlos had been officially charged with internal misconduct. Every shelf was audited. The faulty inventory was recalled. New products restocked directly from verified suppliers. Employees were interviewed one by one, listened to. Not a single detail was left unaddressed. James stayed. He didn't return to headquarters. Still wore the uniform. Still manned the register a few hours each day. Not as an act, but because presence, quiet and consistent, carried more weight than any boardroom speech. But during those quiet days, James stumbled upon something that shook him even more. A routine financial report for the Midrow location landed on his phone, sent from HQ as usual. But this time, a small detail stood out. A fake inventory alert had been flagged 2 months earlier, but was marked as resolved by Marcus Levens. Marcus, personally hired by James 6 years ago. Regional Operations Oversight Director. The same man who once promised, "If a store falls short, I'll be the first to raise the alarm." James couldn't believe it. Marcus, no, But the data didn't lie. The alert had been cleared using an internal IP tied to Marcus's ID. Follow-up inspections mirrored Rick's altered records exactly, and the internal freight support payments routed through an account registered under Marcus's ex-wife's name. James sat in the dim auxiliary office ceiling light, casting pale shadows across the desk. A question hovered in the stale air. Did he know and stay silent? Or was he the one shielding the whole operation all along? There was only one way to find out. A direct conversation. That afternoon, James invited Marcus to Midrow, under the pretense of an urgent meeting on new compliance protocols. Marcus arrived on time. Crisp shirt, confident stride. The store held its breath. James led him to the small back meeting room, once Greg's office. No coffee. No pleasantries. Just a folder placed on the desk. Inside, the flagged report payment records and email logs. "Would you like to explain this?" James asked. Marcus stared at the documents. At first surprise, then deflection. Finally, he exhaled. I didn't start it. Rick came to me, said, as long as I didn't interfere, everything would stay quiet. I didn't take the money directly. They wired it through my ex-wife's account. I needed the cash for my mom's hospital bills. James didn't react. He just looked at Marcus, as if seeing a stranger. Do you remember why I hired you 6 years ago? Because I had experience, Marcus offered. No, because I saw a man who'd been through things, who understood what it meant to serve people who built things with their hands. I guess I was wrong. Marcus lowered his head. I was scared. Scared to lose everything. I thought if I stayed quiet, no one would get hurt. James's tone turned sharp. But people did get hurt. People who bought cracked wrenches and splintered screwdrivers. People who trusted that we were still a decent brand. Me when I realized I might be shielding a lie with my silence. The air went heavy. James stood, walked toward the door. You can resign, right now, or wait for legal to take over. Marcus breathed heavily. I'll resign. James nodded. But as he reached for the doorknob, he paused. I don't hate you. I'm just disappointed. Because knowing something's wrong and still staying quiet, that's betrayal too. Marcus left without a word. And James, he stood there for a long time. Not angry, not broken. Just holding the weight of a trust that had snapped in one more place. 1 week after Marcus's departure, James officially returned to the Land and Supply headquarters. But he didn't come back as a senior executive. He came back as a culture rebuilder. In the largest boardroom on the 15th floor, once reserved for market expansion presentations, there were no PowerPoint slides, no graphs of quarterly growth. Just James standing before the entire executive board and regional managers with a proposal titled in 3 stark words, Reset Culture. He didn't speak loudly, but every word landed like thunder. We're not being attacked from the outside. We're rotting from the inside. Not because we lack processes, but because we lack the courage to confront what's wrong. Not because customers left, but because their trust was no longer treated with dignity. James laid out a 3-phase action plan. Phase 1, clean sweep. Launch surprise independent audits across all branches. Summon all regional managers for one-on-one reviews. Establish a confidential internal hotline for whistleblowing, anonymous and protected. Re-examine all discrepancy reports from the last 3 months from scratch. We can't build anything unless we're willing to tear down the rot first, he said. Phase 2. Rebuild. Retrain all frontline employees under a new module. To serve is an honor, not a task. Pilot a loyalty of longevity program where longtime customers receive recognition not based on how much they spend, but on how long they've stayed. Assign 1 integrity officer per branch, a position not bound by sales KPIs, solely responsible for monitoring operational ethics. Phase 3. Rebrand the mission. Change the company slogan from Built for Work to Built with Trust. Launch a video campaign called I Was Their First Customer, featuring real stories from working-class customers who bought their first tools at Landon Supply. And finally, a public apology. No one's demanding I apologize. But I need to, because if we don't begin with truth, no transformation will ever be real. In the weeks that followed, a clear shift began across the company. Employees stood taller more confidently. Customers, especially those who had felt unseen, returned in numbers. Remote-only managers were now required to work on-site 1 week each month. At Midrow, the place where it all began. Nicole, now the acting manager, opened a staff meeting with heartfelt clarity. We used to think our CEO didn't care. Turns out he was just quietly listening. Now, it's our turn to become the better version of ourselves that our customers deserve. James received hundreds of emails. One of them came from Allie, the young employee who once feared telling the truth. Thanks to you, for the first time, I feel like I'm more than just a name on a timesheet. I'm still here. And I believe I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. 3 months after the company-wide reform, James returned to Midrow. No escort, no bodyguards, no press. Just him, a small pickup truck, and a box of cookies he'd baked himself at 4 a.m. The store looked brighter. Not because of new paint or LED lights, but the employees' faces no longer looked tense. They greeted customers. They looked at one another in the eye during shift changes. And when James walked in, no one saw a CEO. They called him by the name that just 3 months ago was a cover. "Hey, Steve!" Nicole stepped out from the manager's station wearing a newly redesigned uniform with a small phrase printed on the chest. Built with trust. "You're here to check in." "No," James replied. "I'm here to remember why I started." He walked aisle by aisle, ran his hand along a stainless steel wrench, the same model his very first customer once used to fix his roof during a rainy season. That man had since passed, but his son, still using Landon Supply tools. And for James, that was reason enough to keep going. In the break room, Allie, now the lead front desk supervisor, handed him a hot coffee. "You once said, this business isn't about the product," she recalled. "It's about how the customer feels when they walk out the door." "I get it now. They don't need the cheapest gear. They need to be treated like human beings." James smiled. "And you just became the reason I continue." That afternoon, he stood near the exit and watched an older man in worn electrician's overalls come in to buy a coil of wire. An employee greeted him by name, asked how he was doing, and walked him all the way to his truck. No one noticed that James had quietly wiped away tears behind the glass doors. Some founders build brands through advertising. Others rely on capital and growth charts. And then, there are those who choose to begin again by standing behind the checkout counter. James Landon isn't perfect, but he knew when to stay quiet and when to speak up. And from a whispered comment overheard in line, he heard the cry for help echoing from the heart of the system he built. Today, Landon Supply isn't just a place to buy tools. It's a place where human dignity gets restored. If this story stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone in leadership. Comment? I choose to rebuild with kindness. And don't forget to subscribe, because what's coming next are stories more real than fiction.